Welcome to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann, the podcast where entrepreneurs, business leaders, and HR professionals share tips, strategies, and trends in their area of expertise. They also talk about their successes and struggles along their career and business journey. If you love to learn through storytelling and find people fascinating, join us. Welcome to another episode of Rev Up Your Potential. Today, my guest is Maricella Herrera Avila. She is the CEO of Ellevate Network, the largest community for women plus at work, focused on creating a culture of equity and inclusion in business. As a strategy executive with over 15 years of experience building and scaling teams, brands, and businesses, Maricella has led the creation of impactful programming such as the annual Mobilize Women Summit, which reaches thousands of professionals across the globe and is supported by some of the world's leading companies. Welcome, Maricella. You are also the host of Ellevate Podcast, Conversations with Women Changing the Face of Business. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
Well, I'm really excited to have you share about the work that you do and how impactful that can be for women plus in terms of this network. So let's talk about Women Plus first. What does that mean, Women Plus?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think that's an important distinction that we've made in the last few years at Ellevate. Women Plus means women, non-binary individuals, and men who believe in gender equity and want to work with us to get to that place. We believe that we can't reach gender equity if we don't involve everyone in the conversation. And that's why we use the plus. Anyone who feels underrepresented because of their gender identity, and anyone who feels passionate about this mission of getting, more equitable workplaces and more equitable society when it comes to gender, we welcome at Ellevate.
And we're not going to do it without allyship.
Exactly.
And so I like the way you say and men, because there are men who really advocate and support. And oftentimes you'll say, well, I have daughters and I want them to have, a life where they feel valued, they feel important, and I'm rooting for them. So I want to be part of this too. I want to be part of the cause.
There are a lot of men who want to be part of the cause and who believe that it is important. Some because they've had daughters, some because they understand that there is a value in the rest of the population being listened to. And it's honestly, the patriarchy hurts men a lot. The idea of toxic masculinity does, in fact, impact men's lives. So it's in their best interest as well to be in this fight with us.
Yes. Tell me more about Ellevate. I gave the high level, obviously, but tell us more about what Ellevate is.
Yeah. So Ellevate Network is, like you said, the largest community of women plus at work. We've been around since 1999, believe it or not. So we have quite the history. Yeah. It started off as just a way to get women together, particularly women who worked at Goldman Sachs, because that's where our founder was, and expanded quickly. It was about support and community, and how can we get more women into leadership positions, and how can we help each other succeed. And through its iterations, we continue to be a community where you can build relationships, where you can show up and talk about your work and your career and your life, and not just what, you have to show to be confident or build your personal brand, but you can talk about the hard things, the scary things, the good, the bad, the ugly. It's a safe space where, as we come together, we can all learn from each other, feel seen, know that we're not alone in the challenges we're facing, get advice, get connections to opportunities, and kind of fill our cup in a way, so that when you go back to work, you can come with that confidence, with that new skills, with that new knowledge, and our end goal is you come to work with that, you become a leader within your workplace, and then you change you start changing the culture within that workplace. Um, we believe that everyone should show to work and feel included and feel like they belong. And this is our way to get to that.
And I know, because I belong to Ellevate, that there is more than just one, like at work, because you actually have a subgroup. We have different subgroups for executives, for entrepreneurs, and for career women. Share more about the kind of roundtables and those different subgroups that I just mentioned.
Yeah, so we have the beauty of Ellevate is we believe in diversity. And by that, I mean, we believe in diversity of thought, of background, of races, of ethnicities, of sexual orientation, anything, age. It's important that we are in these spaces where we're learning from other people who are not like us. So we do have communities within the community, so to speak. We have groups for executive women, because we do know that when you're an executive, you have different challenges. We're not saying you don't. What we are saying is you can learn so much from people who are coming up the ranks just as much as they can learn from you. And you can help them succeed if you're there with them. Same goes for entrepreneurs. You learn so much when you're starting a business, and you need so much support. You need support from those who are in the same boat as you, but from others who can help you with different ideas or different points of views, or even being your clients later on. So that's what we try to do. We believe in the aspect of having this broad network, because research shows that you need a broad network where you can meet people, have your little tentacles everywhere, kind of hear from opportunities, but you also need close-knit connections. And so that's what we try to do. We have the larger community, which has hundreds of thousands of women around the world, but we also have these spaces where you can talk to people in your same kind of career stage. That's one. Those are the roundtables specifically that you were asking, which we host regularly. And we have one that's every Thursday. That's a general one. And you can come and you're going to listen from a speaker on a topic of interest for about 15 minutes, and then spend the rest of the hour meeting other women in the community and discussing that topic. We also know that just as you have different challenges where you're in different points in your career or your work, you also have different challenges depending on your identity, right? So you can't expect a Black woman to have the same challenges as a white woman. The world is not built like that. And if you're part of the LGBTQ community, you have different experiences. And so we've created our community circles, which are these spaces where you can get together with people of your same affinity and honestly just recharge. It's a very safe space where you can come and just show up as you are. It's an hour for community, for connection, for talking about not necessarily a topic, but just building that rapport with others who might share your experiences. We have community circles for Black women, Latinx women, 40 plus professionals, because again, age, working caregivers, remote and hybrid professionals, LGBTQ plus community, and the Asian Pacific community. So that's another part of what we do. We also have programs like our squad program, which is something that's more structured. So again, we start with the big network. We go into a smaller kind of affinity-based network or groups or career trajectory-based groups, and then we have our squads. And that's even smaller. That's where we match you up with about 8 to 9 other women who you meet with for a period of 12 weeks for 30 minutes a week online. And you get to chat about your goals and really get to make a plan of action to reach those goals. So you have kind of your little accountability buddy circle, so to speak, in your squad. So that's a little bit of what we do in terms of our programming and offering when it comes to networking.
Now, there's one other thing.
Yeah.
Like, And there's more.
And
You
there's
have
more.
chapters, because you said you're the largest community. And I think I want to define, is that community, you said internationally. So are there chapters around the world, or in in North America? Share with us that, Maricella.
Yeah. Our chapters are honestly, they're our heart and soul in many ways. That's where you get your local community. So there's a lot of what you can learn from other people everywhere, but you have that kind of local component too. And we have about 30 chapters around the world. There's a lot of them in the US, but we have our Toronto chapter, which is extremely active, our Dubai chapter, which is extremely active, our Madrid chapter. So we do have others in other countries. And the whole point of that, and they do incredibly great programming, both in person and online. So you can visit your chapters if you're traveling, and you can get to meet people in a local community. And you can also go online and meet people from another city sometimes, which is really great.
I think during COVID, that aspect allowed women to go and visit other chapters around,
Yeah.
the network, for sure.
And it's been great to see. It did start with COVID a lot. Like, we had our chapters which were doing programming fully in person. And then with COVID, we had to switch, right? We had to, like everyone else, adapt. And that's how our roundtables came to be. And that's how our virtual chapter programming started. And now it's beautiful to see, because you have people from different places who are now very much connected with other chapters in other areas who they would have never met. And we have chapters doing co-hosted events. So we have a Long Island and Pittsburgh event the other day. And it's Madrid and some other US city. And it's really great to see that, because like I said, I mean, we are about diversity, but we are about reaching across that diversity. And it's beautiful to see it, not just in terms of your background, but also in terms of your geography.
What would you say are some of the benefits for people, women plus, to belong to a networking group such as Ellevate?
There are a lot, to be honest, because if you think about it, your next opportunity is most likely to come from a loose connection than a close connection. Because when you're with your friends or the group that you're usually with, you kind of already know the same information. So when you expand your group, you get to be tapped into different worlds, basically, to different other groups where you can find opportunities for work, you can find different knowledge, you can find different advice. So that's one. Two, if you're coming up the ranks, or if you want to be more successful, research shows that the way where economic mobility mostly happens is if you're exposed to people who are more successful than you, which is another reason why, for me, it's so important that Ellevate is not siloed, that we are pollinating the different generations and the different levels of your career. So that's also very valuable. And then three, I will say this, and it should not be underestimated. The amount of emotional support that you can get just from being part of a group where you know you're not alone is massive. So we see that a lot with our community, when you can go into a room and feel like, hey, there are other people who are facing the same challenges. Hey, I feel seen. I feel heard. I feel like I'm not alone. That gives you such a, I hate the word empower. But it does give you the confidence to move forward. And the reason I hate the word empower is because you already have the power. Empower denotes that someone is giving it to you, but you're realizing that you have it when you're seeing it with other people. So I think there's an aspect of opportunity, financial and economic benefits to being a part of a group. And there's a huge aspect of emotional and well-being elements of being part of the group.
I know what you're saying in particular, because when I started my own company 6 years ago, there was there was this aspect of, I belonged to a mastermind, and there was this sense of community. We were learning similarly, but we were sharing our own nuances, only to find out that we had similar ideas, struggles, ups and downs. And it was that sense of community that gave support as well. And during COVID, I wonder how people managed if they didn't have a community that they could speak with. And I was fortunate at the time. I belonged to 3 different communities. I was on the go practically all the time with one event or another event, all virtual, of course. But in hindsight, that really helped me feel empowered, not alone, community supported, and ability to achieve even small gains during that very difficult time. I want to focus now on your role, your career. Like, what would you say was the most defining moment for you in your career so far?
That's a difficult question. My career has not been linear. And I don't think anyone really is at this point in life, but mine definitely has not been linear. I started my career in finance. I thought I was going to be a banker for all the rest of the time. I was in Mexico, so it's extremely different. And I do think there was a moment that was, and I do talk about this a lot, where the moment I decided to change my career, that was probably some of the most difficult things I had to navigate, but also really did kind of become a line in the sand. I was in business school. That's how I came to the US. That's how I came to New York. And while I was there, I was, again, like I said, I was thinking, my career was in finance. I will go back to that. I might just change instead of going to Mexico. I kind of want to stay in New York, but that's what I want to do. I want to continue down this path. And I kept going to these networking events or these recruiting events and all of these things while I was in business school. And I kept hating them. It was like dragging in my soul somehow, but it was not for me. And to be honest, I was not for them, because every time I was trying to find a job in this field, I wasn't having the best of luck. And it was hard. It was really, really, really hard. At that point, I had met Janet Hansen, who is the founder of Ellevate. And we had become close. She became kind of like a mentor to me. I was helping her do a business plan for 85 Broads back then, now Ellevate, while I was in school. And there was a moment where I was having my last round interview with a small bank in Mexico, and everything was going to go, kind of everything had been going well. And we had been talking about me coming in to meet the team, all these things. And the last question they asked me before finishing the interview was, "Are you planning on getting married in the next 2 years?" And yes, exactly.
I don't know what the regulations are in Mexico, but in Canada, like, I didn't hear that. I didn't hear that.
Exactly. And I remember being like, and I responded, I was like, "No," but like, clearly there was something wrong, right? And so at that point, I understood that wasn't the place for me, and that the industry I had so fallen in love with, or the definition of success for me at that point, which was go in this industry so you can make X amount of money and do these things, wasn't right. It didn't fit. And like I said, thankfully I had Janet at that point in my life, and she was the person I turned to and was like, "Hey, look, this just happened to me." And, of course she was like, "What?" Same reaction. And it took me a long time. I mean, at that point she was like, "You know what? Like, you've been working with me. You should just come and work with me. Like, this is what you should be doing." And it took me a little bit to be like, do I really want to do that? Do I really want to try this out? That was 10 years ago. So clearly it worked out.
Mm-hmm.
But it took a long time for me to let go of that old definition of success, to let go of that part of feeling like, oh, I failed at what I was supposed to do based on someone else's standards.
Was that what was holding you back? That the fear of failure? Like, I had this dream, and if I give this up, I'm failing.
It did a lot. And, it being in a high achieving environment. So at that time I was doing my MBA at Columbia, and being in that world is it's you get sucked in. No matter what anyone tells you, you get sucked in. And
there'd be a lot of competition, like competition to strive and be more of, in that financial world.
Yeah. And it did feel like I had failed. And it felt like that. I won't lie. It felt like that for a few years, even after I started my work here. I was enjoying what I was doing. And yet every time I was with other people who had gone down the traditional path, like all my friends who were investment banking at that point, who were miserable because were miserable, but they were in a different, making more money or whatever it was. I kept thinking, oh, I failed. And it took a long time.
Thank you for sharing that. I could hear that struggle earlier. Like you said, I would go to these events, but I'd hate it. And I think that shows your fortitude. Like you would persevere even though it wasn't something. And what I'm hearing now is that you were encouraged, not convinced, encouraged to join something that made you happy. Mm-hmm. And I think for too long, we as people think that success is achieving something. And oftentimes that achievement is symbols of accomplishment and finance. And what I'm finding more and more, particularly since COVID, is that people are now not looking for those as the benchmark for happiness and satisfaction. People are looking for passion. What do I love to do? And I remember doing webinars during COVID because I said I was going to stop working because I'm in HR, because we all had to non-essential services stop. And I went to bed and I woke up and said, wait a minute, all these business owners are making decisions that affect people. They don't have the expertise. Mm-hmm. And they don't even know what will be the outcome of things. Whereas myself, with all my HR experience, with all my understanding of business, having had my own, I'm in a position to help them. So that's what I did. And I kept saying to people, you need to do this. Never did I realize we would be off for so many years and that people would have the opportunity to think, what do I really want to do? And they Google and they start finding a hobby or a passion that they'd long given up on. And now we're finding people who are looking for balance. And even my coaching now, like the people who coach me, it's not about making, 6-7 figure salary. It's about the right balance of doing things that I really love to do. The money is not the benchmark. It's that balance.
And we've had this discussion, and I think honestly that the newer generations that are coming up the ranks have that from the beginning. They are coming into the workplace thinking, hey, I want this to be more than my paycheck. I want this to be something that I care about. And when I was coming up, that was not the thing, right? Like, who cares if you're happy? You're making money. And I come from a very entrepreneurial family too, mm-hmm. which is a blessing and a curse, I guess, because it's a different mindset. I had my 10-year reunion from business school last April, and it was interesting to see people after so long. I mean, a lot of my friends I keep in touch, but everyone had changed jobs at least once. I think I was one of the few people who was still in the same place after she had graduated. There are very few. And everyone kept coming up to me and were like, you're doing some really cool stuff. And I'd be like, yes, but also, really? Like, I didn't expect it from you because your definition of success was so different than mine. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting to see how things change and how people's perspectives have changed after COVID.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for sharing that. And did you evolve into this more strategic role? I mean, obviously because of your education, there was that component that you had that capacity to do it. So share a little bit about how you evolved over those 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, when I started out at Ellevate, we were 3 people. So it was Janet, it was me, an engineer, and someone who was working part-time doing customer service. There were 2 other women who actually were leaving. So basically, they were going to go to business school, and I was coming in to kind of replace those 2 roles. And it was a little bit of everything. I love puzzles. That's kind of something I've always been passionate about. And even in my banking era back in the day, I was part of a team that was building a different business unit for the bank. So I was working on the, credit and financing part, but in a very new area. So it was a lot of like building up what that was going to look like. And I felt like that was the same thing that I came into when I came to back then 85 Broads. It was, how do we turn this thing that it's built with so much passion, and it's built with such a community that cares so much about it, and move it along into something that's more structured, more stable, more of a business. Granted, I didn't know that a year after I joined the team, Janet was going to sell the business. So that was an interesting moment. So yeah, and ironically, again, like I'm a huge believer that the universe makes things happen and goes, you kind of have to go with it. I ended up here because of this random, connection. And then a year later, Janet says, I'm thinking of selling the business. I've been talking to this person and I might sell it. The person turns out to be Sally Krawcheck, who was one of the most powerful women at Wall Street. And by the way, while I was in banking, she was the CFO of the bank I worked at. So I didn't know her, obviously. It was massive. It was Citi. But I knew who she was, and I was very excited about it. And so I decided to stay. I was the only person who stayed. So I got to know Sally. The team started growing. We rebranded into Ellevate. At this point, I'm wearing all different hats, right? Like I'm the one that has the institutional knowledge. I'm the one that kind of knows how things are working. I'm trying to make sure that we are building the team in a way that, Christy comes in as the CEO, Christy Wallace, who left last year, but was my partner in crime for like 8 years. And we are building this company in a way that I'm exercising so many different muscles. So now I consider myself much more of a generalist than anything else. If you had asked me this 12 years ago, I'd be like, no, I'm in finance. That's it. But no, I started doing much more marketing. I started doing much more communications. I started doing all of these different things and going back to how do we build this puzzle? And I think that that's what helped. Because I got to learn a lot from different areas. I'm a very curious person, and that also is something that helps. I'm constantly reading and trying to find out things that, this is why I love doing the podcast for Ellevate, because I get to meet so many people and ask them all these random questions that I have. And I think that's what kind of led me to more and more build the strategy for the company, which is what I was doing for the last few years, because I knew it from the inside out. I knew the team members. I had helped build that team. I knew our communication, our brand was ingrained in my heart because I had such a role in shaping it. And thankfully, I had a team with with Janet at the beginning, and then Sally, and then Christy, who allowed me to do that, who gave me space to play around with things and gave me space to, figure out what I was good at and what I wanted to do. And it wasn't very linear. It was mostly just driven by curiosity.
I love the creativity, the finance background, all the things I'm hearing, and you're sharing the various aspects of Ellevate, and knowing that it started off with 85 Broads, 3 women, and now being much more global. And you were at the center of some of that creation. I'm sure you're very, very proud of that. And I can hear that discovery of learning all that you've been good at and tapping that and creating what today is a very, very strong women's networking group. I find I belong to a fair number of different groups. And what I love about this, it constantly reminds me of where I might want to be attending something during the week and being involved in the various aspects of involvement. And I love how you describe it as, there's a larger community, but then you break it up into smaller subsets so people get to know each other and to know each other in a community that is almost targeted towards a need that they have, whether they're an LGBTQ or whether they have, they're Asian women or entrepreneurs or whatever. So, kudos to you. Kudos to you for what you created, and kudos to hear about a journey where you have been able to stretch and grow in a way that of work that you are good and love to do. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, I always give much credit, and Janet Hansen's, one of her favorite phrases is never forget who took you to the dance. And it kind of got ingrained in me. She says that a lot. And I don't, right? I know that she was someone who opened the doors for me to explore a career I would have never in my life thought about, like never. And it was thanks to her that I did that. And then Sally, I remember talking to her at some point when I was maybe 5 years in, and I was like getting bored and restless and being like, I don't know what my future is. And her being like, figure it out here. Like, there's plenty you can be trying out, and giving that space. And I think that, and with Christy, I mean, we're still very close, and still is one of the person I text when I'm like, I don't know what to do about this. And so having that community, I understand, like having those people as leaders who were they had so much trust in me to build and to explore. And I try to do that the same to my team, for my team. In many ways, I feel like Ellevate has given me the chance of almost being like a little lab where I can try things out both on the marketing and communications and consumer psychology side, which I love. It's something I'm very interested in, but also in the people operations side. So how do we build teams that are successful? How do we build cultures where people want to stay? And, I say I've been here 10 years, but our median tenure is around 7 years. So
still, that's great. That's great. Now, you've heard me talk about Rev Up Your Potential, and I've been fortunate enough to be a guest at some of the roundtables and share different aspects. And one of them is Rev Up, and Rev Up is based on the success story my husband and I had creating our engineering company. So for those that are new to the podcast, RevUp stands for treat people with respect, look at them as equals, value who they are, then look at that uniqueness and tap into that potential. And Maricella is talking about her journey similar to what we did to help nurture our staff. And she, in turn, as a leader who has had this role model and this opportunity, is doing the same for her. So I want you to share with people what you think of me articulating some of what you've done in this concept called Rev Up Your Potential.
Yeah, and we've talked about Rev Up in roundtables and in my podcast. And I love it. I've always said this to you. I love the idea of the way that it is that you've structured it, because every single respect, equality, I will say, value, uniqueness, potential, like every single aspect of that, I think, is what makes leadership and companies in specific be human centric. Right?
Yes.
Respect, I believe equality and equity are the number one thing that we should be striving for. And then that starts with respect. Like inclusion within companies, respect is one of the main aspects of it. And the rest to me is, can you lead people like you would like to be led? Do you care about people? I subscribe to the Radical Candor school of management, basically, and the idea of care deeply about your people and treat them as people. And that's why I like this model so much, because I think it brings that to something that should be so intuitive and simple, and yet it is not, because we get bogged down by all these other, things within the business world particularly, and it brings it back to the human aspect, which is
Yes.
what I think how I learned, and how I think we should help people learn.
Yeah, I created it because it was our success story, and to coin it in a way that would help other people understand. And anytime you and I have talked about our businesses and what we do, that theme of people centric comes into being, and it makes such a difference. And it brings, you know, for those who are really finance focused, it helps with productivity, it helps with profit, your engagement is there, your retention, and so therefore you're spending less money on your human resources, on needless human resources like turnover and terminations, and orienting people who are now new because other people have left. So many good things when we are people centric, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, and we get the commitment of our people, which honestly is kind of priceless if you think about it, because they
Well,
become your biggest advocates.
it's more fun working in a place where
Oh,
people all
totally,
care about what they're doing
totally.
for the company and what they're doing with each other. It just, I talk to some of the people at Ellevate in various ways, my chapter, people that are working with you, and they just love what they do. They really do enjoy being a part of an organization that cares, that's people centric, and the work that you're doing is helping people, connect with community and feeling, better about themselves. What kind
Yeah,
of
and
advice would you give to our listeners? We've had a lot of things that we've shared. Is there certain kind of advice you might help them to do anything your mind wants to think about? Your piece.
ooh, uh, there's a lot I think that I've learned that I'd like to share, but from what I've told you, and I told your listeners, I think the first thing is it starts with knowing yourself and really taking that time to know yourself. Because if you want, and again, we go back, if you want to be happy, you have to know what moves you, what drives you. And I hear a lot of the talks on values and purpose. And look, you don't find your purpose, you build your purpose.
Mhm.
And you can do that if you know what's deep inside you will drive you. Don't let the definition of success that someone else has created drive where you go. Make sure that you're listening to that, like, inner person that might be screaming deep down. There's so much more that you could be doing.
What gives you happiness right now?
That's a great question. Lots of things, and yet not that many things. It's an interesting question because I talk about this. I'm not pretty shy about it. I do suffer from depression, and so that's kind of a bummer. But also, I've been reading this book that's called Bittersweet. Highly recommend. It's by Susan Cain, and it talks a little bit about melancholy and longing and people who have that as part of their personality. But it's because you appreciate also the beauty of it. And so I've been thinking a lot about that, and I do identify kind of with that aspect. So when I think about the things that bring me joy, a lot of them are a little bit tied with a little bit of nostalgia in a way. So for example, I was just on vacation, and seeing my family brings me a lot of joy, but it's also pretty hard. But it brings me joy. Especially my nephew. I have a 16-month-old nephew that I adore, but I don't see him that often. So that's why, I mean, when I say, like, it's tinged with a little bit of sadness. I'm a runner. That brings me joy, just being outside and running. Yet I have 3 broken toes. So I'm starting to run again, finally. And working with people who care. I think that that's one of the things that brings me lots of joy. When I see people who are invested in other people. And I see that a lot through Ellevate. I see that a lot because the times I hear people tell me the meaning and the impact that what we do has had in their lives, it's pretty incredible. And and thankfully I get to hear that quite a bit.
which can bring joy as well. Thank you so much, Maricella, for sharing, about Ellevate, about your journey, sharing that you suffer from mental health. And actually, I didn't know that. So even though you share it widely, I didn't expect that to come at the very end. But thank you, because I think too often we don't talk about it, and when people do talk about it, people don't know what to say. They go,
Yeah.
look the other way or whatever. So it takes courage to talk about it, and we need to keep talking about it and support people as they go through their journey. So thank you for sharing that part of it.
I just
What?
want to make sure we're taking the taboo out of it.
Yeah, no, and it's so important to start to feel comfortable and being able to talk about it. We're coming up to the end of the time, and I wanted to have you share with us what's next and how do people get a hold of you?
What's next is a lot. We're building Ellevate to be greater and stronger every day. One of the things I'm most excited about what's next is our Mobilize Women Summit. So this is something we started 7 years ago. This is the 7th year we do it. It's one of my biggest passion projects. When I talk about that creativity and that flexibility, this was one of the things I got to do. And it's a full day. It's going to be virtual still. It's free. You can sign up at ellevatenetwork.com. And it's a day of conversations that go a little bit deeper. They go more into the social justice space in many ways. We're going to talk about things like the caregiving crisis. We're going to talk about things like gender equity and climate change. It's when I believe we can come together to have somewhat uncomfortable conversations, but that are going to be necessary if we want to make change in the world. So I'm very, very excited about that. We're planning to have, again, it's June 7th, full day online, and it's free because the more the merrier. We really want to make sure that the conversations are being amplified and the voices that are going to be there are being amplified because they're going to be fantastic.
Cool. And how do people get a hold of you?
Oh, how do people get a hold of me? LinkedIn is the easiest way. Maricella Herrera A. Or just search Maricella Herrera Avila. I have a LinkedIn newsletter if you want to hear my musings. It's literally called Musings of an Emotional Latina. And yes, it's a joke. I'm not really emotional, but it is a stereotype that I've been called many times. So I'm trying to take that back. And yeah, you can follow me there. Shoot me a note. I always reply. Might take me a while, but I always reply.
Thank you very much for being our guest here today on Rev Up Your Potential.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to our listeners and our audience and our viewers for tuning into Maricella. It was just a wonderful conversation that we had. And if you liked it, give it the thumbs up. And if you want to hear more about other interesting people and you love to learn through storytelling, then subscribe and follow other podcasts that we have. Thank you very much for being part of our conversation today. Thank you for tuning in to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay up to date on our latest episodes. For HR tips, news, and strategies, or if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, visit our website at peoplebrightconsulting.com.